You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Reed Coleman.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. I'm your host, Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. When you're there, click on the links in the right-hand sidebar to subscribe to the show. I'd like to thank some sponsors for making today's show possible. First off is George Weir with his book Gem of Sky, Book 1 of the Factions of Sky series. Jim is an orphan living in the floating city of Cirrus. As the dreaded Horn attack, Jim and his friends are scooped up in an adventure of a lifetime when the floating orphanage Janus is destroyed. Not only must Jim, Crowan, and a mech named Goat survive aboard a Horn capital ship, but they must find a way to save each other and all of Sky. In order to do so, Jim and his friends soon find themselves in the crosshairs of the two greatest fleets ever assembled, with a battle coming that may bring nightfall upon Earth forever. But there's a hope and a well-kept secret buried beneath a mountain far below in the land left devastated by the 200-year-old Holocaust. Gem of Sky, Book 1 of the Factions of Sky by George Weir. There's a link to it in the show notes. And thanks to Patricia Gilliam for sponsoring the show. Her book, Out of the Gray, which is the first book in the Honaria series. You really want to pick this up. Aliens, Politics, and Murder. Only the first one is new. This is such a fantastic series, and you can get in on the beginning of the series right now with Book 1, Out of the Gray. The Honaria series is one of my favorite series from one of my favorite writers. You're really going to love what Patricia's doing. Thank you to Patricia for sponsoring the show. Also, at the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have Reed Farrel Coleman on the show with me today. If you like crime fiction, noir fiction, you probably know Reed Farrel Coleman's name. He is the author of several series, the Mo Prager series, also books with Gus Murphy, but he also has taken over Robert B. Parker's Jesse Stone series, and we're here to talk about his brand new book today, Colorblind. Welcome to the show, Reed.
I'm happy to be here.
We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, that's easy. I was 12 years old. I grew up in an angry household. I mean, we loved each other, but we were a bunch of screamers. To say the least. And, you know, when you live in a family of screamers, no one hears anything. So I discovered poetry as a way to have a different voice, a voice that could be heard. And I was about 12 years old, started writing poetry. And you know what? I noticed I could be heard above the shouting. And that was really exhilarating, frankly, that feeling of having my own voice and one that could be heard.
Yeah. Were you a fan of poetry? Were you a poetry reader before that point?
You know, I guess I was more of a song lyric person, and you know, growing up in the '60s, it was kind of a golden era for song lyrics. You know, Bob Dylan, Simon and Garfunkel. So it was that was where the love of poetry started. You know, when you're 12 years old, the kind of poetry you learn is not very exciting. So I guess I took it more from songwriting than from actual poetry.
Well, and good songwriting is that it can touch you on many different levels, and you know, you can weave metaphor, and it becomes something much denser than it seems to be on the surface, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You know, and then after I started writing it, and it actually got some traction with it, I then went to college and studied it. And look where it got me.
Look where it got me. Poetry is a strange thing that I think it resonates with everyone on a certain level, and because the pieces tend to be shorter, sometimes very short, sometimes bigger than you first anticipate. It seems to be easy, and I think a lot of people try their hand at it because they think, oh, it's just a short poem, and you learn very quickly that it is an art form that has to be mastered. That it appears to be easy, and it is extremely hard and complex.
I agree with that. I think it seems, because of the form is so short, it seems so simple, but the fact that keeping it short and tight and compact is actually a very difficult thing to do, and especially if you try to write in one of the classic forms, like a sonnet or haiku. There are rules, and actually that helps when you transition into prose writing. That sort of ability to condense things and to be evocative in not so many words, it turns out to be quite a helpful skill. Sure. Coming from your self-described angry house and loud house, you said the poetry helped you be heard above the din of everything. What sorts of imagery was evocative to you? Well, that's an interesting thing. I grew up in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn. And for the listeners who don't know, Coney Island is an amusement park. It's an amusement park that goes back to the 1890s. So there were rides, and it's right on the ocean. And the juxtaposition of the amusement park area, but it was very kind of old and decrepit by the time I was growing up. Its heyday was even as ancient as I am. Its heyday was well before me, and it was always a place of used to be and once was. And so that kind of sense of having grown up missing the golden times was a really an emotionally evocative things, which was symbolized by the kind of old and rusty rides of the amusement park. And I mean, to you, did that bring about thoughts of freedom and escape and just getting out of the kind of the chaos that was around you? Well, it's strange. What it evoked in me most was a yearning for what I could never experience because it had been what was. Right. So it was kind of yearning to both escape into the past and to look into the future. And so those thoughts of nostalgia, what could have been, but also what might be still. Yes, and who thought that we'd be discussing a crime book this way? I know. But that's what fascinates me is those early influences and those early expressions seem to weave themselves all through our story. As we grow and we go on, and that's one reason I ask people about those early memories and influences, because those things tend to still be popping up as we're as old as you and I are. Yeah, well, and there's one old memory that I think will give you and the listeners a real clue as to why I do what I do. We just discussed me starting to write poetry at 12. Well, at 15, I watched somebody die of a gunshot wound right in front of me. So now we've made that rough transition from the kind of nostalgic and yearning poetry to the harsh reality of having grown up in Brooklyn. And I was 15 years old. It was a beautiful summer's day. I was walking to work at a local ice cream parlor, heard a gunshot, I knew it was a gunshot. I don't know how I knew it was a gunshot. I knew it wasn't a firecracker. I knew it wasn't a truck backfiring. And as a typical stupid 15-year-old, instead of running in the opposite direction, I ran toward it. And I got to the street just as a middle-aged man fell into the pavement, a dime-sized red dot in his shirt, and I watched him die right in front of me.
Oh, wow. And that's one of those indelible memories that's just branded in your memories, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's the kind of thing that you can't forget even if you try. And, I think that one of the themes I often write about in my work is the fact that a violent crime resonates into the future, even in generations that aren't alive when the crime happens. I think often about that poor man's family and how, removing him from their lives affected his family and what his future generations of his family, how they are affected, what they've known about this man, because his life stopped obviously much short of where it was meant to stop.
Right. But you also write about characters that tend to run toward the problem instead of away from it, which I find interesting. That at 15, you ran toward the danger, and you tend to write characters that do that. These guys that are trying to find justice in a place where justice doesn't always seem to want to be.
Yeah, and that's one of the fun aspects of writing crime fiction. As my friend S.J. Roseanne likes to say, in these books, we supply answers. And in real life, sometimes there just aren't answers. And so it's kind of fun to be somebody who supplies some answers and explanations in a world that seems to be sometimes absolutely chaotic and free of answers.
Right. What did your family and the people around you think about your artistic expression and your newfound love of writing?
Oh, well, I think my brothers dismissed it because I was also a jock. So, I played high school football and wrote poetry. So I guess they thought it was pretty cool, or they didn't think about it much. I think my parents worried about how was I ever going to make a living.
As all parents do.
Yes.
They're like, they're probably like, the word that usually precedes poet is starving.
Well, yes. I've often said that if you want to be poor, be a writer. If you want to be impoverished, write poetry.
Yeah. So what prompted you to move to prose or to add prose to your skills? What prompted the love of writing longer stories?
Poverty. No.
The great motivator.
It's actually a very interesting story. I did not read crime fiction growing up. I mean, I was a big Kurt Vonnegut fan. Hesse. I read the books on my own that, you're forced to read in college. And I love science fiction. Actually, my genre of reading was science fiction. So I worked at Kennedy Airport for a while, and I once a week had to go into Manhattan from the airport and have meetings, but there was a long gap in time between when I had to leave the airport and meet, have the meetings in Manhattan. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take a class back at Brooklyn College. And I looked at the bulletin, and there was a class in American detective fiction. And I swear that this is how it happened. And the first three books we read were Farewell, My Lovely, by this guy named Chandler, The Continental Op, and The Maltese Falcon by this other, maybe slightly unknown author named Dashiell Hammett. And I went to my wife, and, if she were here, you could get her on the phone and ask her if this was true or not. And I said to her, I this is what all that poetry training was for. I think I can actually do this, and is that okay with you? And she said, yeah. For the second time in her life, she said yes to me, and has deeply regretted it both times. So she said, yeah, go ahead. I don't want you to be 50 and be miserable. I want you to chase your dreams. And I did. And so my first 3 novels are me teaching myself how to write prose.
Did you publish the first novel that you wrote?
Actually, this makes new writers crazy, because the answer is most people have like 2 or 3,
sure,
unpublished novels in
a desk drawer,
right, in a desk drawer, and that should never see the light of day.
Right.
Well, the first piece of long fiction I ever wrote was published as my first novel.
Nice.
So yes,
nice.
In some ways, I'm not sure that served me well, because sometimes when I think back on it, I think, the desk drawer might be a better place for it. But it allowed me the chance to teach myself to write, and it gave me the encouragement that, hey, maybe I can do this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we all have books that, and maybe everything that writers write, the writer maybe is never fully comfortable with, like I've never met someone that has a book and said, that book is just perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing. Cause you go back and read your earlier work and say, oh God, I wish I'd have done this or that, or, I guess that's just part of it.
Yeah. I think, a great metaphor for that is if you ask actors if they watch themselves in their movies,
yeah,
very few of them actually do, because they're horrified at the thought. And I don't reread my early novels. I'm much more comfortable with it now. As I say, I've published 30 novels, and I'll get it right eventually. And the only mystery here is how I got published in the first place. So yeah, I think, you're never fully satisfied.
Right.
And you shouldn't be.
Yeah. Who did you publish those first 3 novels with?
It's a small publishing house. It's a traditional publishing house, but a small one on Long Island called the Permanent Press. They've actually published a lot of award-winning crime novelists, and, we didn't make a lot of money. But like I said, I owe the fact that they published me, I owe them a lot. They gave me my chance, and you always owe the person who gives you a chance a lot.
Absolutely. Reed, do you feel like that publishing has changed, in that, it seems like earlier times, a writer had more of a, kind of a career arc before they were expected to really deliver that masterpiece, or to have the book that really broke out sales. Do you feel like that publishers used to kind of work with authors more before? And music is a lot the same way. It used to be that you would sign an artist to a record label, and they really expected that third album to really be a breakout. Do you feel like that's changed?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Legion are the ways in which publishing is different.
Oh, sure.
From when I started to now. I mean, my first novel was published in 1991. It's always great to say, yeah, I was first published in the last century. So my first novel was published in 1991. 1991, you had to physically submit books. Right. More
in the cardboard box.
In a cardboard box or in a brown envelope. Many more publishers took unsolicited manuscripts so that you didn't need an agent to submit. Not all the imprints were owned by 4 or 5 companies. Think of the consolidation that's gone on in publishing. So there are lots of imprints, but they're all owned by 4 or 5 publishing companies. So just those changes are huge. And then there's what you just alluded to. You used to get, I knew people who got 5-book contracts, right? No one gets 5-book contracts. Well, maybe Lee Child and Michael Connolly and Janet Ivanovich get 5-book contracts. But no one starting out now gets 5-book contracts in the hope that, the publisher will help you develop, you'll gain a following, and you'll take off. Those days are over. And I think they're over forever in that, it's 1-book and 2-book contracts these days, and that the numbers need to be good immediately. And that's tough because I think probably a lot of really good and maybe even great writers' careers are prematurely ended because they're not given a chance.
Yeah. Well, I hope that there's a way to change that because like you, I feel like there's a lot of great material that's going unread because of that. But I don't know. Maybe all the turmoil in publishing will shake itself out eventually. Let's hope so.
Well, you alluded to the music industry before, and I happen to play golf occasionally, and I was playing golf a few years ago with a gentleman who used to do musical scores for movies, and his comment was, they've changed music from a great career into a very interesting hobby because, and I think publishing caught themselves and learned from some of the mistakes that the music industry made. And I think they rescued themselves from the same fate as record labels. But let's hope.
Yeah,
because
let's hope.
I still think you can make a living at this, and I still think there's a future in this. But recording, you're either very small or very big in the music industry these days.
Right. Or you're the folks that are just kind of in that mushy middle, and you're constantly doing shows, and that's where all of your income is coming from, just the daily grind of it all. Right.
Well, it used to be that you toured to support the album.
Right.
These days, touring is where you make your money. And, I'm about to go on tour. I'm in the beginning of a tour. And all I can tell you is I'm on tour for 2 weeks. And I come home and I'm a wreck. And I can't, right. I can't imagine when bands go on roads for months at a time, how they stay sane.
Well, that's why they all have such healthy families.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. Tell me another one.
Right, exactly. Reed, you talked earlier about being from Brooklyn and those very Brooklyn experiences that you had. Do you feel like, well, as a reader, I sense in your work a very particular place and feel that I can only assume comes from being from Brooklyn. How do you feel that your experiences and where you are from has shaped you as a writer? Well,
it's an interesting thing is I think I do setting very well, even when I'm not writing about Brooklyn. But as I have a friend, Peter Spiegelman, another really excellent author, says, setting is the soil in which you grow your story. And for me, it's an indispensable part of the story because it was such an indispensable part of my story. So even when I don't write about Brooklyn, setting is very important. So Paradise, Massachusetts, where Jesse Stone is the chief of police. I've never been there, and as a matter of fact, it doesn't exist. There's no such place as Paradise, Massachusetts. But when I write the Parker, I think this is one of the things that distinguishes my writing the series from Bob Parker's writing of the series or Michael Brandman's writing of the series is you have a real sense of Paradise in a way you didn't with those other gentlemen's writing. I mean, I'm not saying I write the books better than they did. I write them differently than they did because I cannot get away from the fact that setting is so important.
You get a different experience of the character because setting is so important. It's like a movie with multiple camera angles. You get the Bob Parker angle, and then you get it's same story, same characters, but you give us a different look into it, maybe.
Well, you're the first person who uses the same analogy that I use. Bob Parker and I use the same camera, but we use different lenses.
Yeah.
My focus tends to be, more narrow, and in that narrow view is where the character is all the time. Bob had more of a broader sense of character than I do. So, both are, I think, and I hope, readers think both are very good. They're just different.
Right. Oh, well, since we have crossed over into Parker territory, how did you come to pick up the Jesse Stone series? Robert B. Parker is iconic in the genre and in writing in general, but and made some incredible characters with lots of staying power. And, he passed away, several years ago. And, how did you get to take up Jesse Stone?
Well, for me, it's an interesting story. I thought it happened this way. And of course, most of the time I was absolutely wrong. After Bob died in 2010, his widow, Joan, went to a very famous bookstore owner and editor named Otto Penzler and asked him to put together a kind of dedication anthology to Bob and his other character, Spencer. And Otto and I have known each other for a long time, and Otto likes to torture me. So when he invited me into this anthology, he said, "You're the one author who can't write about Spencer. You have to write about Jesse Stone." So I went and I researched and read all the Jesse Stone books. I'd read some of them, but went back and read them all and wrote this essay. And, people say it's a very good essay. So my assumption was when Michael Brandman and Putnam and the estate parted ways, that they read this essay, thought it was good, thought I understood the character, and gave me the job. Well, the first time I had a talk with my first editor, who had been Bob's editor for 30 years, I said, "So you like my essay?" And she said, "What essay?" And I said, in the anthology In Pursuit of Spencer. And she said, "I've never heard of that. I have to go buy it."
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So what really happened, although I like my story better, was that I had just finished the Mo Prager series, so they knew that I was available. They had always liked my writing. They knew I had done collaboration with other writers, and they thought, well, let's offer him the job and see what he can do. So I wrote 50 pages of the first book, and then they gave me a 2-book contract. So I must have done something right, or I came very cheaply.
Reed, I like both of those stories. I like your story and their story too. So, that sometimes the truth is okay too.
Yeah, I'll take it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I however I got it, I'm glad I got it.
That's right. You have kind of famously said on a couple of occasions, talking about your being a pantser and writing by the seat of your pants as opposed to outlining. When you take over something like Robert B. Parker series with such a wealth of books already published, and Parker had such an enormous back catalog of books and lore and legend around all of these characters that were so firmly cemented in people's minds. Is your writing process for Jesse Stone different than if you were doing a series of your own? Does all of that backstory matter to you in the way that you plan out a novel or don't plan it?
Well, the answer is, strangely enough, it doesn't change. The only part that changed was the first two Jesse novels that I wrote. I ran my concept for the plot by the editor. So she could either say, whoa, you're way out of line with that, or, yeah, that might be something Bob would write about. But I have to say that the estate has been very open-minded about the books I've write, and I guess I must be doing something right because the first four were New York Times bestsellers. So I guess they trust me. But the process is pretty much the same. Again, one of the slight differences is I had to read all the books again to get a real sense of Jesse. The deal was this: I would not change who the character was. I could write it my way, but I couldn't make Jesse a different character. And I think I've accomplished that. I don't write Jesse or, Molly or Suit exactly the way Bob did, but they are still the same people they were.
Right. When you're writing the Jesse novels, do you have your other series that you have been working on? Are those still hovering in the back of your mind? Do you have any trouble balancing the Parker books with what you as a creative writer want to continue to pursue?
No, I'm really good at compartmentalizing. But what that means is it's really difficult for me to work on two things at once. So while I can write a short story with a different character while I'm writing one book or the other, while I'm writing Jesse Stone or the other projects I'm working on, I can't write two novels at once. I've tried it occasionally. That gets really jumbled. So because I don't work with an outline, that's the one spot where maybe having an outline would help, but I'm not a fan of outlining, so I just do one thing at a time.
Do you feel like outlining stifles the excitement for coming to the work every day and sitting down at the computer and discovering the story? There's two famous views on this, and one is Jeffrey Devers. You might have heard of him. Devers, Jeff's attitude is, only when I've written a thorough outline can I really sit down and be creative and enjoy my work. And the other is Stephen King, who famously said something to the effect that outlining is like the mediocre author's, last resort. So, right.
we're gonna have a cage match between Jeff Devers and Stephen King. But I wouldn't phrase it like Stephen King did, but what I would say is this: if I feel I don't know what's coming next, neither will the reader. If it surprises me and excites me, it'll surprise and excite the reader. When I do an outline, I feel like I've already written it, so why would I want to write it again?
Yeah. And ultimately, if it's not exciting you as the writer, then it's not going to be what you would like to think is your quality of work, is it?
No, and it'll, like I said, if it bores me, it'll bore same rules apply. If it bores me, it's going to bore the reader.
Yeah. Well, the latest book is Colorblind. It's the new Robert B. Parker, Jesse Stone novel written by Reed Farrel Coleman. Reed, tell us about this particular story. Where do we find Jesse Stone in this book, and what can we expect?
Sure. As I said, numerous times during our talk, and by the way, I've enjoyed this immensely because I like interviews where I actually get to give full answers. It's fun. You've interviewed a lot of people, and if you listen to interviews, you're often not allowed to give full answers.
Right, which is ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to say I've enjoyed this experience.
Well, thank you.
A lot. But, so the new book, as I've written many series, there are times in a long-running series for what I call a change novel, whereas the stories have kind of, now this is 17 novels into the series, okay? And in every one of those novels, Jesse's drinking, Jesse's struggling with drinking, as I like to say, you can only drag a character over the same hot coals so many times. So one of the features in the last few books that I have set up is Jesse had to come to some decision about his drinking. Either he was never going to stop or he was seriously going to stop. So one of the features of this book is Jesse is coming back to town from a stint in rehab and is now for the first time attending AA meetings. So that's part of the change. No longer is Jesse struggling with drinking. His struggle now will be not to drink. And those are two very different things. Secondly, someone shows up in town, an annoying 20-something, who has a real issue with authority, and especially in the form of Jesse Stone. But Jesse sees something in this guy and for some reason takes a shine and interest in him. He is an agent of change. So we have the agent of change of Jesse seriously tackling his drinking problem. We have this new character in town who Jesse takes an interest in. And lastly, and this is really what the book is about, is there are crimes happening in and around Paradise, Massachusetts that are clearly racially motivated. And as Jesse has been warned by his friend, quote unquote, and mob friend, Vinnie Morris, that the crime in Boston will someday infect Paradise, and that time has come. So there are these racially motivated crimes, and then the one female African-American officer in town is involved in a shooting, and the shooting involves a white teenager. And so I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say although it really wasn't ripped from the headlines, because I handed in this manuscript a month before Charlottesville, I'm not blind to what's going on in the world.
Well, sure. And sometimes you just get a feeling of things that are just kind of bubbling under the surface. And, sometimes the handwriting's on the wall, that you start getting, you talk to enough people and you feel, just the unease. And I think a good writer can pick up on those things and, not necessarily predict the future, but maybe help people express the things that they're already feeling or expecting or, things like that.
Well, I think that's what a writer's job is. Now, I want to make it really clear, to you and to the listeners, I'm not into message books. Like, I don't write message books. So this is not Reed Farrel Coleman standing up on a soapbox and screaming, this is the way I feel. These books are about how Jesse Stone deals with difficult situations. That's what good crime novels are about, right? You put people that you care about, or you hope the readers care about, in difficult situations, and you see how they handle it. So although the subject is very topical, very important today, that's not why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I wanted to see what would Jesse Stone do, not what I would do. So it's not a message book, and I think it's a good crime story. So we'll see if the readers think that.
Absolutely. Well, and just like you were talking about, putting Jesse, through, some different emotional, challenges, there's, having a character in a long running series that kind of faces the same, trials and struggles over and over again can be a comfort, to readers. You know, that's one reason we go back to series, because we kind of know what to expect. We kind of like to watch this character go through that, but we have to be honest with ourselves that we really want to see some growth out of that character. We want to see what else he or she is capable of. And by the same token, by giving, some situations that we all are uncomfortable with, and then seeing how our favorite character deals with that, is great for all of us as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, Jesse is all about doing right. That's what Jesse is about at his core, doing right. And I thought, you know, at his core, someday he would recognize that the right thing to do would be to handle the same problem we've read and heard about him coping with for all these books. And that's just something Jesse would do, so I don't think I changed Jesse, because this is something someone who is so dedicated to doing right would do. And you know, I have to believe that I've done the right thing in this book with this character.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The new book is called Colorblind in Robert B. Parker's Jesse Stone series, written by Reed Farrel Coleman. Reed, I have so enjoyed talking with you today. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of Colorblind, the new book. It's out, available everywhere now, in hardback, Kindle. I believe it's out in audiobook as well, isn't it?
Anyway, it's also in chiseled in stone. You can get it in any format. And you know, it's available in all bookstores. It's available in all formats. And just another quick plug: along with Colorblind, the paperback for the previous Jesse Stone novel, The Hangman's Sonnet, is also available. So if you want to see the lead up to how Jesse winds up where he is in this novel, pick up the paperback as well.
You know what? I'm going to link to both of them in the show notes, Reed, and make sure that everyone gets a copy of both of those. Reed, if people are just kind of learning about you and your work, I mean, God forbid you got 30 novels out, but if they're not familiar with you, where can they find you online to maybe dig into your back catalog and see news about what's going on with you?
Sure. You can find me pretty easily, because I'm the guy with no hair. No, you can find me online.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a reason we get along.
That's
you
right.
can find me at reedcoleman.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I answer every bit of fan mail I get. Fan mail, what I call it fan mail, even hate mail I answer. So I'm readily available. I guarantee you that if you write to me, I will write back to you. I hope everybody goes out and buys the book, and I hope they gain something from it. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They made instant coffee and laid blankets over a pile of hay. He helped Kate pull off her boots. She volunteered for first watch, but Jason couldn't sleep. "Talk to me?" he whispered. Kate sipped her coffee. She sat silhouetted against the soft navy sky. A field of stars hung above her. The constellations peered in through the windows and slats. "How about a story?" "Sure. My mom used to tell this one. It's the legend of the Star Maidens." He watched her words as she spoke, her story illustrated by puffs of vapor that mixed with the steam of her coffee. Long ago, a Mohican brave became lost in this valley. He'd followed a red deer deep into the woods, but the deer had vanished, and as twilight fell, he lost his way. He searched the heavens. He saw a bright star and followed it. It shone upon a clearing in the woods. Spook Rock lay at the center, emanating magic. And in the starlight, he discovered the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He discovered a star maiden. She was dancing with her sisters, and all 7 were naked. "Oh, really?" Jason whispered. 7 naked star maidens? Shh. Why do these things never happen to me? The brave decided he must take the Star Maiden for his wife, so he seized her and threw her over his shoulder, and she loved him for his courage. They married and had a son. Then what? Then it gets sad. The Star Maiden missed her home. She gazed at the sky every night. She loved her husband and her baby very much, but she missed her sisters, and she especially missed the dancing. So she snuck away one night and returned to the sacred rock, and she begged her sisters, please appear to me for one last dance. They came to her and took her into the sky. Kate's silhouette swayed. One last dance. It was wonderful. And when the dance was finished, they sent her back to Earth. She thought that she'd been away for only a little while. But that one dance had taken many, many years. She ran back to her husband, back to her baby, but they were gone. Her home was empty. The hunter had stopped waiting for her. He'd given up hope that she would return. He'd taken their child and had left with his tribe. One last dance had cost her everything, and she had no home at all. Jason could sense something roiling inside Kate, some brew of feelings that the story had stirred. He wanted to leap up, to grab her and carry her off, his Star Maiden and wife. She climbed up to Spook Rock. She heard no music, only wind. She died there of her grief. She dwindled and lost her star form. She became a will-o'-the-wisp, fluttering between the trees. And see that constellation? The Pleiades. Those are her 7 sisters, watching down from heaven. And, to this day, if a girl has lost her true love, she can go to Spook Rock and dance, and the Star Maidens will bless her. They'll grant her one wish, any wish at all, except one. They can't make her true love return.